Since I have been talking a lot about DHT and adding exogenous DHT to TRT protocols, a lot of people take an interest, and there's been a lot of experimentation that's gone on, and I'm proud of it. Listen, DHT is what makes us men. It is what masculinizes us. I mean, it's predominantly like if a female goes on androgens, like so say she's like running a cycle, it's what masculinizes her. You know, I don't know if you've seen it, but, you know, girls that start running steroid cycles, their voice deepens. They start being more manly. They start acting like men. That's not testosterone. That's DHT. At the same time, I mean, if you look at the literature and study it enough and you study penile physiology, DHT is what makes the penis work. Without it, the penis won't work. Yeah, I mean, we see this case in point with people that take 5-alpha reductase inhibitors. They block their DHT for long enough. Both libido and erection quality goes down the toilet. And I think a lot of people think, well, if I just dose TRT, I should get enough DHT, right? I mean, it converts to DHT, doesn't it? Well, the answer is yes, it does convert to DHT, but not in all cases do you actually get enough. There are a lot of cases in which just adding a little bit of exogenous DHT fixes a TRT protocol where not a whole lot else could. Long esters, they've got a bad reputation for inducing sexual dysfunction, and it's because they have a wacky distribution of DHT versus estrogen, highly in favor of estrogen and a little less in favor of DHT. Test prop. Okay, test prop is pretty DHT friendly, but it also can raise estradiol quite a bit depending on your dose, and sometimes a little bit of exogenous DHT fixes that. I'll make this statement and I'll break this down further in the video. Exogenous DHT works much more like estrogen control than endogenous DHT. Something to keep in mind. All right, so sit back, relax, grab a beer. Let's break down the use cases, the intelligent use cases for exogenous DHT on a TRT protocol. Let's get into it. All right, before we start the video, look, Cortex Labs, which is my company, is a TRT and sexual dysfunction resolution company. We mainly do coaching, but I built a bunch of products around TRT that are instructional courses and show you how to dial in sexual function. Most popularly purchased is Mastering Testosterone Cream. It's a video course specifically teaching you the protocols to fix libido and erections and get them prime on test cream. There's also one for testosterone cypionate. It's called Mastering Testosterone Cypionate, so you want to go check that out. Buy that. Watch it. You can purchase it, download it, start watching, start executing in under a minute. And then lastly, I am a coach on TRT. But that's the bulk of what I do. Listen, if you're having libido and erection issues on TRT, I got a number of different coaching packages, including a single session consult that you can book with me in under a minute, and we will get the sexual function stuff resolved. Book me in under a minute, livecortex.com. We hit the ground running. Now, posts like this are the predominant problem around DHT. I mean, obviously, we have the medical establishment which kind of frowns against it, right? Like, it tells us DHT, all it does is cause us hair loss and enlarge our prostate and fucking cause a bunch of additional problems. None of the time is it discussed as, like, the main androgen, active androgen, in nitric oxide signaling and the facilitation of the male erection, which it is. So right there, that should sort of stop you and make you think that the advice that you're getting around DHT is probably wrong. Now, I'm not sure if it's just because, you know, they've got 5-alpha reductase inhibitor drugs to sell, or if the medical establishment still does not quite know. You'd be surprised how you've got super intelligent medical professionals that are completely in the dark about things related to physiology. Yeah, this happens, you know, this happens a lot. This is basically a dude who has a friend who's getting male pattern baldness, and he is suggesting blocking DHT to his friend, and his friend lashes out on him, saying, hey, dude, DHT is important, so important. And he's right. But this guy says it makes you go bald if you have genes for AGA, and enlarges your prostate, increases your risk of prostate cancer. Okay, neither of these are true. It increases oil production in your skin. This is true. It destroys your collagen and elastin structures. That is not true. I mean, just the stuff that people say out here, like, this is why, like, you really have to take shit with a grain of salt and go back it up. Or hopefully you have a YouTuber that's backing it up that you can trust. Guy in the comment section, Finn and dutasteride absolutely wrecked me at any dosing protocol. The topical version still made me feel like shit. They honestly need to come up with a better solution than these shitty drugs. I'd rather go bald than kill my DHT. So here's a guy on the other side, recognizes it. And a lot of those folks that block DHT, they're on the other side eventually, because they see that their, you know, erections go south, their libido goes away. Now they have serious sexual dysfunction. Let's talk about the use cases. All right, so look, you know, I introduced source lists. It had been out there before, like, you know, folks could go and procure DHT, but it wasn't, you know, as easy. So I brought it to the picture on source list. You can get source list, livecortex.com. where you can find 20% DHT gel. It's an oil base and it comes in at 20% concentration. And usually folks have to reconstitute it to make it a lower dose to make it work for their TRT protocol. So what I'm going to do is just give you some use cases and some caveats of using exogenous DHT in a TRT protocol so you really understand, is it necessary? When is it necessary? And how do I dose it? You're not converting enough to DHT based on prior use of 5-alpha reductase inhibitors. This is arguably the best case for using exogenous DHT on a TRT protocol or using it in any context, because in those cases, you are devoid of fully functional 5-alpha reductase enzymes. So your testosterone doesn't convert as much as it should to DHT, and therefore there's only two pathways for test to go. It converts a lot more to estrogen. That's just leading you in the path of sexual dysfunction. In this case, a person should certainly go on TRT. There is no other solution to PFS, as an example, than TRT, but it's got to be done right. I mean, that's why there's a lot of folks out there saying TRT didn't work for me for PFS. Those are 100% of the time bad protocols, which don't factor in. There's a uneven distribution of DHT versus estradiol, highly in favor of estradiol. So you've got to have a protocol that is finely tuned in order to fix sexual dysfunction after taking a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. But, in this case, getting 20% exogenous DHT oil, it's called gel, but it's really an oil base, and then diluting that to where you've got 1 milligram per drop, because it comes in a dropper vial, putting that on the scrotum every day or every other day is, again, arguably the best use case for DHT. There are some more. I'm going to get to them in a second for guys that are just on TRT. But here, you've got impaired 5-alpha reductase enzymes. You're already not converting enough of your testosterone into DHT, and your ratios of DHT to estrogen therefore get skewed, and you have continued sexual dysfunction. This is one of those cases where people that have PFS take TRT, do it wrong, and say TRT doesn't work and swear it off. The best case here, though, is even further. I'd take it this step further. Get E2 in range, which means you're probably going to have to lower end a dose test, whether it's cypionate or something else, another ester, and then you add the milligram of DHT to the scrotum every day or every other day. This is the best use case for DHT. Not everybody's going to be in that case, but I'm sure some of you, I know definitely some folks that watch this channel have taken finasteride in the past and have sexual dysfunction because of it. So you're probably going to want to get your hands on some 20% DHT, diluted to 1 milligram a drop, and try 1 milligram every day on the scrotum or every other day. All right, the second use case is you're on TRT. Estradiol is slightly overrange. Call it 37, 38 picograms per milliliter. And yes, for some individuals, most in fact, that's going to cause a degree of sexual dysfunction. Like, things might be all right, but they're not great. You're wondering why your erections kind of start failing during sex here and there, why you're not horny all the time, why you don't have nocturnal erections. Well, it's the overage of estradiol. But if DHT is kind of lukewarm mid-range, call it, it's around 50 or so nanograms per deciliter. This happens on cypionate enanthates quite often, right? Where the E2 is like a little bit over range. You're on a modest dose. You're trying to just control things. And DHT is just really not impressively high. You want it between 60 and 90 nanograms per deciliter. Okay, that's where you want it. If you go slightly super physiologic, that's okay. In those cases, all you need is just a little help from exogenous DHT. You get a little DHT in there, again, 1 milligram a day, 1 milligram every other day, in some cases 1 milligram every third day. We'll talk about kind of the half-life of effects of DHT here in a bit. That should knock the E2 down a little, bump up the DHT enough, and then you reach the zone. That's just generally the applicable zone for most folks. You have to have high DHT, you got to have E2 in range. If you can manufacture that with a little bit of exogenous DHT, which is very possible, I've seen work a lot, well, then you dial in that way. You bump up the DHT to favorable ranges, and you get favorable DHT estradiol axis numbers, right? Call it 70 of DHT, 27 estradiol. That's a favorable axis right there, the DHT estradiol axis. In those cases, again, at 37 estradiol, where you were before you just hypothetically brought in this DHT, like, things were okay, but kind of lukewarm and in the middle. The DHT, then the erections are stellar, libidos great. The primal libido comes back. When you're around your girl or girls and whatever you're interested in, like, drives you viscerally. That's DHT, boys. I wouldn't be able to tell. I don't know yet. It does not seem good. I'm going to get to a caveat in a bit. You don't want to be dosing loads of it. If you get the 20% concentration stuff, 99 out of 100 times you're going to want to dilute it to be a lower concentration, all right? Because you want to be able to surgically maneuver the doses up and down to reach your goals. You don't want to be making these large swings in DHT. You don't want to make large swings in anything ever. Third use case is you want a noticeable bump in libido and sensation. By the way, DHT drives sensation very heavily in the penis when things are okay, but could be better. So like, say you're in range on estradiol, okay? You're at 28 or 30 or something picograms per milliliter. Your DHT is sitting at 60, which is kind of the low end of the threshold of what I would suggest, 60 to 90 nanograms per deciliter. But again, those are pretty good looking numbers. But, you know, you got a boys' weekend. You got a weekend going. You're going to go out to the club, right? You're going to go out and maybe see some girls. And you want to bump in libido and erection quality so that you don't have to like be like, oh, should I rely on Cialis 20 milligrams? You won't even have to think about Cialis if the DHT estradiol axis is in check. Now, in this case, like, because you're already really close with 60 DHT and like 30 estradiol, you're already pretty much in the zone there. But if you want that noticeable bump, you don't want to do overkill on DHT. You want to do a milligram on the scrotum one time. Let it sit for 1 to 3 days and do nothing else, right? If you do more, you run the risk of crushing estrogen at the gene expression level and messing with sexual function, because it can do that. Again, DHT acts much more as kind of estrogen control, more so at the tissues when it's administered exogenously than it does when you have your innately endogenously converted DHT that you're converting from testosterone. It's like taking, extra external DHT is more powerful at controlling estrogen, in other words, than your inborn DHT that you're converting from testosterone. Now, regarding the take 1 milligram and let it sit for 2 or 3 days, yeah, the half-life of DHT is about 4 hours. 4 hours, okay? But that does not mean that its effects just stop after 4 hours. First of all, at 8 hours, the drug is completely out of your system or mostly out of your system. But DHT has a pronounced endocrine optimizing effect at the tissue level in the testicles, the penis, and in the seminal vesicles, where, by the way, 65 to 75% roughly of your semen is produced. A lot of people think it's like strictly the testicles. It's the seminal vesicles. And DHT optimizes that heavily. There's loads of 5-AR in that tissue. And that has a lasting effect, okay? You're talking about 1 to 2 days, possibly 1 to 3 days. So if you're just looking for a modest bump that's noticeable enough in sexual function when things are pretty okay and estrogen's in range and DHT's kind of up there, 60 or so, milligram of DHT, one off. You don't want to continue dosing it. Just do that one time. So you don't run the risk of crushing estrogen, causing any degree of sexual muting, which can happen with too much DHT and not enough estradiol. And then you have your cake and eat it too. You could have a little bit of DHT. The sensation increases, the primal libido increases, erection quality increases, and climax sensation increases. And then you can go off and have your boys' weekend or do whatever, and things are optimized from a little bit of DHT. The last use case that I've seen be really effective, now this is a little murky, but it does work. I've seen it work before, is if you're on higher doses of TRT, like sports TRT, and that's like, 250 to 350 milligrams of testosterone a week. Above 350, you're looking at cycle territory. Estrogen is in fact high, but you don't want to take an AI. You're on the cycle. You're on the sports TRT cycle. You're just trying to add some anabolism, a few pounds of mass, get stronger, increase your PRs or whatever. And you're doing that for 2 months. But sexual function is not great, obviously, because estrogen's probably at 55, 60, 75, maybe even 80, depending on the person. And you want to manufacture a state at the tissue level which reflects controlled estrogen and high DHT. Then you want to run a full milligram of DHT on the scrotum every day. That's one of the only use cases where every day you don't run much of a risk, because you're pumping out a lot of estradiol at a 350 milligram dose of testosterone cypionate per week. I mean, you're going to be making loads of estrogen, right? So there, you could superficially manufacture a state at the tissue levels where, because of the gene expression blocking and because of the mild aromatase inhibition via, blocking the genes that encode aromatase enzymes, making you make less of them induced by DHT, you then kind of balance out the system, even if you've got higher end serum estradiol. Yes, this is possible The reason I said it's murky is because it's not super sustainable, but eventually the estrogen is just going to overpower all that DHT, and you don't want high estrogen anyway. But at least in that case, you can get an infusion of DHT. It acts at the tissue level as an AI, essentially, but a more controlled, better AI than AIs, which are fucking like sometimes like a hammer, you know? You want a scalpel. You know, I don't necessarily think you want a butcher knife. And this has happened to me. You know, I've suggested this to clients. I was on sports TRT, didn't want to manage estrogen in the beginning, took some DHT, and that fixed the sexual dysfunction. Was it perfect? No. But was it passable and doable so that I could date at the time while also fucking being jacked, you know, and being on 300 milligrams testosterone a week? Yes, it did work. Caveats. Let's talk about caveats, because it's not all peaches and fucking roses here when it comes to DHT. You want to use the minimal amount necessary, okay? Like the least that you can use is what you want to use. There are people out there that are suggesting like loading DHT to super significantly super physiologic levels. I do not suggest that because rarely have I seen it been useful. And also there are strong caveats. Above 1 milligram a day on the scrotum, you run the risk of pretty substantial hair loss, acne, to the point where it's going to be uncomfortable because, like, you know, you wearing a stringer or something at the gym, it's going to be all over your shoulders and all over your back. Agitation comes with super, super high DHT. And one of the interesting things, which our girlfriends are going to know, we're insensitive. We're like insensitive because we're just strictly DHT dominant at that point. And that might make your relationship a little wacky, right? You lose your empathy for your girl or whatever. None of that's good. And that tends to happen when DHT is just overpowering everything, you know, sitting on the rooftops with a fucking megaphone, DHT, you know, and the E2's down there like, oh, I can't really, you know, like you're just strictly DHT dominant. You don't want to be 100% DHT dominant. Everything is a balance. And then overstimulation. Yeah, DHT can be pretty powerful. It's not like caffeine in the same stimulatory way, but it kind of makes your brain feel a little like unsettled, like if it's too high. Those of us that have experimented with DHT and taken it higher than it should be know that that feeling comes along with that, and it's just not the greatest place to be. So you run that risk, so be careful. Second caveat, you need to find your frequency, whether it's every day, every other day, every third day of dosing small doses of DHT. Again, as I said, it acts quickly, leaves the system fast, but its effects persist for 1 to 3 days. So, I mean, you know, you don't want to be just like loading it up. You got to find your frequency that works well for you. Because if frequency is off, like you're dosing it too frequently, you might mute your libido a little bit. You might even inhibit erection quality a little bit because it's too much of an aromatase inhibition-like effect or an estrogen blocking effect, which can cause you to have Johnson problems. So be careful with it. Understand like the minimum effective dose strategy. That really does apply with DHT, boys. Believe me, you don't want to just skyrocket it to 400 or 500. It's not doing you any good and it's doing you more harm. In the end, DHT is not something that you should just willy-nilly bring into the protocol. You got to treat it like a scalpel. Think about this, right? It's either a butcher knife where you're just bashing away at shit, or it's a scalpel and you're doing things really, really surgically with minor adjustments. That is the best way to use exogenous DHT. There are more use cases, but those are the prominent use cases that I see in a coaching capacity with clients over the years that work well. The caveats apply too, because I've seen all the downsides of taking too much DHT, so please keep that in mind. And I hope that this has been useful. All right, as I said in the beginning, look, listen, if you don't want to go at this stuff alone, just hire me for coaching. This is what I do. I've been doing it for longer than a half decade, and I take people from having erection issues, libido issues, sensation issues on TRT to the point where then they have youthful erections, great libido, killer sensation, and the climax feels amazing, where the sexual system works well. Listen, there has to be a balance in everything, and there are some principles you must apply to TRT in order to have good sexual function. And a lot of the information that's out there just doesn't cut it and gives you bad advice and ends people in positions where they have sexual dysfunction. Look, fix it with me. There's a number of different packages. The most popular lately is the Sexual Function Protocol Blueprint. Single session consult, 30-minute call with me, full protocol generation, 3 to 5 action routes, TRT protocol tracker, online document for you. I will fact find, I will figure out what your situation is and give you suggestions. For the real pesky stuff that needs time, I mean, look, sometimes we're going to need time to adjust protocols. For those of you that have the budget, just don't waste time and go with a 3-month or a 6-month. The 6-month is more advanced for super hard to resolve sexual dysfunction. That's where we really get into the nitty-gritty of solving these problems. Either way, what I do is fix libido, erection, sensation, climax problems on TRT, and you can hire me for any of this stuff in under a minute. We're on the fact-finding call as soon as the next day at livecortex.com or down the description of this video. As I mentioned regarding DHT, just go get source list. Anything you can think of, including that, is on it, and they're all highly vetted sources. That's down the description of this video as well. Mastering Test Cream. Hey, listen, you need to optimize DHT. Just get on Test Cream. But don't take the advice that's out there on the web. I wrote the instruction manual, essentially. It's a video course showing you how to dial in libido and erections on Test Cream, and you can get that now. All right, it has been an absolute pleasure hanging out with you. I hope you guys had a great weekend. We're still in Pittsburgh recovering from this snowstorm that we got, and now everything's frozen, so that's why I haven't kind of been in action. It's been a lot. It's been a lot of work getting the snow cleared out. There's still work to do, so those of you that got caught in this thing, Godspeed. Otherwise, like the video, makes a huge difference. Please like the video, makes a huge difference to the algorithm and YouTube. We really need you to sub to the channel. If you're new here and you like what we said, I'd love to have you on board. So much more content like this in the future and a lot in the past. Otherwise, brothers, enjoy the rest of your day. Kick ass, rock on, and I'll talk to you in the next one.